Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today, we're diving deep into Al Gore's Earth in the Balance. You've shared this book with us, so we know you're interested in humanity's impact on the environment. Get ready for some fascinating stories and surprising insights. And stick around to the end because we'll leave you with some thought-provoking questions and, of course, a call to action.
You know, this book isn't just some dry analysis of environmental problems. Gore actually takes us on a personal journey. He weaves in his own experiences and observations to, really paint a vivid picture of the challenges we face.
He doesn't sugarcoat things, does he? Right from the start, he compares the environmental crisis to the threat of nuclear war. I mean, it seems a bit extreme, but maybe it's a wake-up call we need?
Yeah, I think the comparison really highlights the scale and the urgency of the situation. Both threats have the potential for global and irreversible consequences. But, he also uses the analogy to highlight our capacity for collective action. If we could mobilize to prevent nuclear war, we can do the same for the environment.
That's true. He also compares the planet's environmental systems to the human body, calling the Earth's surface its skin. It's a striking image. It really emphasizes the fragility and interconnectedness of our planet.
It does. And Gore argues that our modern civilization is dysfunctional in its relationship with nature. We've adopted this worldview that separates us from the environment and encourages exploitation for short-term gain.
It reminds me of his comparison of the environmental crisis to dysfunctional families and totalitarian regimes. Seems like an odd connection. But it makes you think.
Yeah, he's pointing out this pattern of denial, this tendency to avoid uncomfortable truths and seek external solutions to internal problems. Think about it. Families in denial. They avoid addressing underlying issues. And totalitarian regimes, they often blame external enemies for their own internal failures. Similarly, we often deny the environmental consequences of our actions, or we look for technological quick fixes instead of addressing the root causes.
So how does this dysfunction play out in the real world? He gives several historical examples, right?
Yeah, he dives into the history of climate change, showing how past civilizations have been affected by environmental shifts. He talks about the Hekla 3 volcano eruption in Iceland, which had ripple effects as far away as ancient China and Europe. He also brings up the mysterious collapse of the Mayan civilization, potentially linked to climate shifts, and the Irish potato famine, which coincided with a warming trend in the 1840s. And of course, he discusses the Dust Bowl in the United States, a stark reminder of how unsustainable practices can devastate entire regions.
It's a sobering reminder that we're not immune to the consequences of environmental change. In fact, he argues that our actions are actually accelerating these changes at an alarming rate.
That's right. He points to deforestation, ozone depletion, and of course, global warming. What's fascinating here is that Gore was one of the first politicians to really grasp the seriousness of climate change. He even held the first congressional hearing on the issue back in the 1980s.
Yeah, and he faced a lot of resistance, didn't he? Even from people he thought would be allies. He talks about the power of the status quo, particularly the influence of the fossil fuel industry.
Right, and this resistance underscores the challenge we face. It's not just about understanding the science. It's about overcoming deeply ingrained systems and powerful interests that benefit from the way things are. It's about changing our mindset.
Okay, so we've established that the situation is pretty dire. But Gore doesn't just leave us with a sense of doom and gloom. He offers a way forward, a path to a more sustainable future.
He does. And that brings us to his bold proposition, the Global Marshall Plan.
Now that sounds intriguing. What exactly is that?
Well, stay tuned, because we'll be diving into the specifics of that plan in the next part of our deep dive. So Gore's Global Marshall Plan, it's not just about, tweaking existing policies. He's calling for a complete overhaul of our relationship with the planet.
Wow, that's a tall order.
Yeah.
Can you break down what that actually means?
So imagine a global effort, modeled after the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe after World War II, but this time it's focused on environmental recovery and sustainable development.
So we're talking about a massive mobilization of resources.
Yeah.
And a global commitment to change.
Exactly. It's about shifting our priorities from an economic system that ignores environmental costs to one that prioritizes ecological health.
But how do you actually convince governments and corporations to prioritize the environment over profit?
Well, Gore suggests a range of policy changes. For example, he proposes a CO2 tax, but one that's revenue neutral, meaning it's offset by reductions in other taxes.
So it's not about punishing businesses, but about creating incentives to reduce emissions.
Right. He also talks about tax incentives for environmentally friendly technologies, increased funding for renewable energy research, and even government purchasing programs to create markets for sustainable products.
That's a lot to unpack. Are there any real-world examples of these ideas in action?
Absolutely. He highlights the success of the first Green Revolution, which dramatically increased food production in the 20th century. However, he also acknowledges its unintended consequences, like the overuse of pesticides and fertilizers.
So are you saying he's against the Green Revolution?
Not at all. He actually calls for a second Green Revolution, one that learns from the past and focuses on sustainable farming practices. He points to the Kenya Greenbelt movement, where women planted millions of trees, combating deforestation and empowering their communities.
So it's about finding solutions that benefit both people and the planet. But let's be realistic. Can we really transition away from fossil fuels entirely?
Well, that's a key part of the plan. Gore argues that we need to rapidly develop and deploy renewable energy sources, like solar, wind, geothermal, and even hydrogen fuel cells. He even criticizes our misplaced priorities, pointing out that we pour billions into developing advanced fighter jets, but haven't made nearly as much progress on electric vehicle technology.
It's a powerful point about where we choose to invest our resources. But a transition on that scale, it would require a lot of change. Wouldn't it disrupt existing industries and economies?
Well, he acknowledges those challenges, but argues that the cost of inaction is far greater, and he believes this transition can create new economic opportunities and jobs. Imagine cities redesigned for energy efficiency, with green buildings, better public transportation, and reduced waste.
It sounds like he's envisioning a complete transformation of our society.
He is. He even delves into the nitty-gritty details. He talks about redesigning buildings to be more energy efficient through better insulation, strategic placement of windows, and even planting shade trees. And he challenges the out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach to waste management, pushing for a shift towards reducing, reusing, and recycling.
It's about thinking systemically, about how all these pieces fit together. But is it really possible to change our entire civilization's trajectory? It feels like we're talking about a monumental task.
Gore believes it's not only possible, but necessary. He reminds us that we've overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles in the past, like mobilizing to win World War II or working together to prevent nuclear war.
It does make you wonder, if we can achieve those things, why not this? What makes the environmental crisis different?
Well, the difference lies in our mindset. We need to move beyond the allure of quick fixes and technological solutions and embrace a more holistic view. We need to rediscover a sense of reverence for nature and recognize our interconnectedness with all living things.
So it's not just about changing our policies or technologies. It's about changing our values. But how do we actually make that happen? It seems almost too big to grasp.
That's where the individual comes in. Gore emphasizes that real change starts with each of us. He challenges us to become what he calls environmental stewards, actively engaged in protecting and restoring our planet.
So where do we even begin? What can one person do in the face of such a massive global challenge?
We'll delve into specific actions you can take in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, consider this. What resonates most with you from what we've discussed so far? What sparks your curiosity or concern?
It's definitely a lot to take in. But, you've painted a pretty compelling picture of the challenges and the possibilities. But it's easy to feel overwhelmed, right? Like, what can one person really do in the face of a global crisis?
Well, Gore reminds us that individual action is really where it all begins. Think of Linda Draper taking on General Electric over their release of those harmful CFCs. One person can make a difference.
It's inspiring, but most of us aren't going to single-handedly take on giant corporations. So what are some more, shall we say, approachable actions for the average person?
Well, Gore talks about becoming environmental stewards in our daily lives. It can be as simple as reducing our own consumption, making conscious choices about what we buy and how we use energy.
So being mindful of our footprint, even in small ways.
Exactly. Supporting businesses that are committed to sustainability, advocating for change in our communities, and even just talking to friends and family about these issues can have a ripple effect.
He also advocates for a mission to planet Earth, right? What's that all about?
Oh, that's a great one. Imagine a global network of data gathering and education, monitoring environmental changes and empowering the next generation to be informed and engaged. Classrooms around the world could be connected to real-time data about our planet's health.
That's a pretty amazing vision. But Gore also acknowledges that individual action isn't enough, right? We need systemic change as well.
Oh, absolutely. He's adamant about reforming our political and economic systems. He talks about revising how we measure economic progress, maybe even changing the definition of GNP to include environmental factors.
So moving away from a purely profit-driven model to
Yeah.
one that values sustainability.
Precisely. He suggests implementing that CO2 tax we talked about earlier, offsetting it with reductions in other taxes to make it more palatable, and creating incentives for businesses to adopt environmentally friendly practices.
It's a huge EE shift, but it feels like a necessary one. He's ultimately calling for a fundamental change in our values, isn't he?
Yeah, he wants us to move beyond seeing nature as just a resource to be exploited and recognize our interconnectedness with all living things. We need to confront our own denial, the ways we've contributed to the problem, and take responsibility for building a better future.
It's a powerful message and leaves me with a lot to think about. So for our listeners who are now equally inspired and overwhelmed, what's the one key takeaway they should hold on to?
I would say remember that change starts with awareness. Pick up a copy of Earth in the Balance and delve deeper into these ideas. And don't forget, even small actions, when multiplied by millions, can create a wave of change.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some food for thought. If Gore's message resonates with you, consider picking up a copy of Earth in the Balance and joining the conversation about creating a more sustainable future. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and purchase via the link. Thanks for joining us.